Good afternoon to our US viewers and good evening to those watching in Europe. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Johan Fleck and I'm the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. And it is my privilege to welcome you all to this conversation with His Excellency Micheál Martin, Tánaiste and Ireland's Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defence. Tánaiste Martin, thank you for joining us today. Nearly 50 years after Ireland joined the European Union, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine is reshaping Europe's security environment and leading to a geopolitical rewiring of the EU. In the EU, the impacts of this crisis have reached as far west as Ireland, where 70,000 Ukrainians now seek refuge from the Kremlin's brutality. At the same time, April of this year will mark the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. A milestone in the peace process, the set of agreements halted most of the violence that had afflicted communities in Northern Ireland. It ushered in new institutions, a devolved system of government, and a quarter-century of stability for Northern Ireland. While Europe faces new threats to its security, we will take a moment this afternoon to reflect on the significance of the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement, as well as the challenges it may face today. Against this backdrop, we're fortunate to have the Tánaiste here today with us for his timely visit. Deputy Prime Minister Martin has a wealth of experience in Irish politics, having held a number of senior ministerial posts in various Irish governments. Most recently, he served as Taoiseach, Prime Minister of Ireland, leading his country in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This past December, he was named the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence. Deputy Prime Minister Martin, it is a pleasure to have you here with us today. Before we begin, I would like to encourage our audience here in the room and online to join the conversation on social media by following AC Europe and Atlantic Council on Twitter. With that, Tánaiste, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Dobryansky, Council members, thank you for having me here today. And standing here, I am mindful of the many thousands of people in Syria and Turkey who this morning are waiting on news of loved ones. My thoughts are with those who lost family and friends in Monday's terrible earthquake. An international response is being mobilised to assist with search and rescue. Ireland is part of that response. More cooperation will be needed to help rebuild the communities touched by this tragedy. That international cooperation is in the spirit of the founding vision of the Atlantic Council over 60 years ago. The challenges the world faces today would look both vastly different and very familiar to those wise founders. This is a time of war. Responding to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the United States and Europe have stepped up our cooperation. This is a time of disinformation, and that's why it's important that we speak clearly. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a grave violation of international law and a blatant breach of the United Nations Charter. It's a challenge to the rules-based order, which, although imperfect, has lasted since 1945. Embedded in this order are universal values expressed in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. All people have the right to live in dignity and to have their human rights and fundamental freedoms respected. When those values inform our politics, our laws and our actions, hope and optimism follow. In Ireland, we have enjoyed 25 years of hope and optimism. The Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace to Northern Ireland, rooted that peace not just in human rights values, but also human rights institutions within an agreed order with popular legitimacy. More generally, for most countries, a rules-based international order is not a vague aspiration, but a vital necessity. Effective multilateralism, rooted in universal principles, protects us all, whether big or small. And that is why 100 years ago, One of Ireland's first acts as an independent state was to apply to join the League of Nations. One of Ireland's longest-serving foreign ministers, Frank Aiken, a man who knew the price of conflict at home, spoke in the 1950s of the importance of, and I quote, a system of world government in which disputes between nations will be settled by law based on justice rather than by force, unquote. Interdependence based on collectively agreed laws is the essence of the European Union, a remarkable experiment in pooled sovereignty that is one of the world's most remarkable and enduring peace processes. Ireland joined the European Union 50 years ago, and membership has been transformational, driving economic change and in many ways contributing to peace on the island of Ireland. It was because of Ireland's commitment to the value of the rules-based order that we stood for election to the United Nations Security Council for the period 2021-22. We assumed that responsibility to make a difference, in full knowledge of the Council's flaws and need for reform. Notwithstanding those challenges, and they are many, there is much in Ireland's contribution over those 2 years in which we can take pride. The question now is, how do we take that momentum and progress our priorities beyond our Council term? The first thing we need to do is to live our values. We must do our best to deliver on the principles of inclusion, equality, non-discrimination, and parity of esteem that are unlocked and transformed relationships on our island, paving the way 25 years ago for the Good Friday Agreement. As one of that agreement's architects, John Hume, when awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, said, "The basis of peace and stability in any society has to be the fullest respect for the human rights of all of its people." The Good Friday Agreement's requirement that the European Convention of Human Rights be incorporated into law offered the foundations for a reset in Northern Ireland. In turn, this enabled new confidence in the rule of law and opened the way for the transformation of justice and policing reform in Northern Ireland. Justice and policing now enjoy support across all sides in Northern Ireland. In 2010, policing and justice powers were devolved to the Northern Ireland Executive, something which was unthinkable even a few years earlier. The Good Friday Agreement also mandated the establishment of human rights commissions, north and south, to vindicate and uphold the rights of citizens, giving them confidence in the settlement. Implementing a peace agreement is never easy. Building new relationships, consolidating trust, requires an investment of time and energy. Rules, institutions help. The United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union, under whose umbrella both Ireland and the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, shared common rules and institutions, has complicated things. And that's why successive Irish governments have made the protection of the Good Friday Agreement across all three of its strands within Northern Ireland, Ireland North and South, and East-West a priority. A delicate balance in Northern Ireland has had to be reset. The protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, which the United Kingdom government agreed with the European Union as part of its withdrawal package, was part of that reset, but remains a challenge which the European Union is currently working with United Kingdom negotiators to resolve. With pragmatism and purpose, I believe a sustainable solution acceptable to all communities is within reach. Functioning political institutions in Northern Ireland would help people address day-to-day challenges. Some of those challenges are universal, such as getting a decent education and a good job, although of course with a Northern Ireland flavour. Some are specific, in particular the legacy of violence, which saw too many killed and injured during the Troubles. While the Good Friday Agreement states that it is essential to acknowledge and address the suffering of victims of violence as a necessary element of reconciliation, no proper process was put in place then to make this statement meaningful. Victims express frustration at what they see as a lack of progress towards truth, justice, and accountability. Serious attempts to put in place an agreed framework for dealing with the past have been made, And this included vital contributions from American partners, in particular Megan O'Sullivan and Richard Haas, and the conclusion of a number of inquiries and inquests. However, far too many families still have unanswered questions. There are still too many myths and mutual accusations for us to build the truly reconciled Northern Ireland its people deserve. I thought we had a mechanism to deliver for families and societies when in 2014 in the Stormont House Agreement, the two governments and most parties in Northern Ireland set out a pathway to deal with the past. Sadly, the Stormont House provisions on legacy remain unimplemented. Instead, in the last year, the United Kingdom government has chosen a unilateral approach with its Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. This bill is opposed by all Northern Ireland political parties, by victims groups, by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and by the Council of Europe. It is opposed by Westminster's own Human Rights Committee. Just recently, 27 members of the US House of Representatives wrote to the Prime Minister to voice their opposition. I fear that if implemented, this bill would break trust in the very principles on which peace has been built, setting back reconciliation and keeping wounds open. It holds out the possibility of immunity for perpetrators of gross violations of human rights and closes off avenues to justice, undermining hard-won confidence in the rule of law and the justice system. This will damage individuals and it will hold back society. Without dealing properly with the traumas of the past, they become the trauma of the next generation. Instead, we should be building our understanding of the trauma experienced by individuals, by families and by communities, and in that understanding, ensure that these harms can never be revisited. And that is why, as a co-guarantor of the agreement and as a friend and partner of the United Kingdom, we're urging the British government to reconsider its approach. A collective approach based on consent, inclusion and rights has underpinned every step of progress in the peace process. Legacy should be no different. While the Good Friday Agreement belongs first and foremost to the people of Northern Ireland, it was in many ways made in America. The United States played a central role in the search for a just and peaceful solution that President Ronald Reagan spoke of on St. Patrick's Day in 1981, a phrase echoed by President Bill Clinton in Derry's Guildhall Square in November 1995. President Clinton urged all those at the time to, quote, have the patience to work for a just and lasting peace. Reach for it. The United States will reach with you. It was a promise of American support, a promise he and you fulfilled. Throughout the peace process, the bipartisan support of so many friends of Ireland across all levels of government and from communities across the country has been essential. And this includes Ambassador Dobryansky, who served as President George W. Bush's envoy to Northern Ireland and whom I worked with in my capacity as then Minister for Foreign Affairs. And we thank you, Paula, for your engagement and commitment at that time. The values we support in Northern Ireland are the values we support internationally. In a time when autocracies are emboldened and human rights violations are increasing, Ireland and the United States have worked together during our recent term on the UN Security Council in support of the international rules-based order for human rights and universal values. American support for peace continues to make a real difference in the lives of people in Northern Ireland. The story of peace is a story we forge together. It is essential, too, that we go beyond simply the politics of peace. And my vision is of a shared island, one where we can work together on the many areas of common interest, north and south, recognizing that, thankfully, there is a generation now that has never known the violence of 25 years ago. And that's why 2 years ago, I launched the Shared Island Initiative to enable the full potential of the Good Friday Agreement to be unlocked, working with all communities and traditions on the island of Ireland. This is underpinned by a €1 billion fund, a series of dialogues allowing us to listen to what the people of the island want for their future, and commissioned research, substantive research, so we might better understand each other. I hope through this to enable a step change in partnerships, north and south, and also east and west, working inclusively and constructively. And through the Shared Island Initiative, to sustain the journey of the Good Friday Agreement, to ensure that its values are those of the next generation. And I am optimistic that we will succeed. This is a time when we need to remind ourselves to be optimistic. We share a challenge to bring a just peace to Ukraine. I don't underestimate that challenge, but I am confident that it is one we will overcome. The recent history of my island shows that we can make progress and move on from challenges once seen as insuperable. I look forward to seeing Ukraine at peace, fulfilling its aspiration to become a confident member state of the European Union. I see a duty too to invest in hope, with Ireland's foreign policy supporting the rules-based order in which we all thrive. I look forward to working with the United States and other partners in this endeavour. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Tánaiste, thank you for sharing those really excellent and most thoughtful remarks with us. And I want to welcome to everyone to today's conversation, including those who are here with us in person. And I'd like to recognize Ireland's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Byrne Nason. We are delighted that she is here with us. And also thank you for all of those of you watching online around the world. We're really glad to have you here with us today. And Tánaiste, especially, it's a real privilege and honor for the Atlantic Council to have you here with us today. I'm Paula Dobriansky. I am on the board of the Atlantic Council, and I'm also vice chair of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and I'm honored to moderate today's fireside chat discussion. And I just want to reiterate just a housekeeping note. We encourage all of you to participate in the conversation online, on Twitter at AC Europe and at Atlantic Council. And to those watching on Zoom and with us here today in person, look forward to welcoming your questions during this discussion. And you may ask questions by submitting them via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I might already mention, we already have quite a few. So I'm going to get some of mine, and then we're going to really engage those who have tuned in. Let's focus in on the Northern Ireland peace process. You really gave some very on-point comments and very specific comments on where you see things. Obviously, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. My question to you is, how do you gauge the peace process? Say a bit more, you laid it out, but how do you gauge it in Northern Ireland, the peace process in Northern Ireland? And in your view, what has worked and what is most important left to accomplish here?
Well, the absence of violence has been a tremendous boon to Northern Ireland. I think it has enabled Northern Ireland economically to develop. It's enabled a new generation to emerge free from the real harmful impact of violence. I would have grown up in the Republic knowing the daily reports of violence and the daily experience of violence from a Southern perspective over 30 years. I never thought we would get it resolved. And it was a great honour to be member of a government that was there at the time, the Good Friday Agreement. I would have been Minister of Education at the time. So that's the great win from the peace process, without question. And there's been a better relationships developed north and south and east and west, and particularly the British-Irish relationship benefited enormously from the Good Friday Agreement. On the negative side, the politics has been a bit stop-start. The executive, if you look over the 25 years, has been stood down on quite a significant number of occasions. That's not good. And I was involved previously as foreign minister in devolving justice and so on. So that's the negative side. So I do really think we need to focus on sort of ensuring greater stability and sustainability of the political institutions over the next while, get them restored in the first instance, and then create a situation where we don't have that stop-start, where for various political reasons someone pulls down the executive or the assembly. So that to me is one of the negatives. The other side of it, I think socially and it's been a passion of mine for many, many years. The education dividend could be stronger. I do believe I'm passionate about school completion, about no child being left behind. And there still would be in Northern Ireland certain communities where education completion is not at the level it should be. And if I was relaunching this and saying, what do we do for the next decade? I would focus on that issue of school completion, progression to further education. That's just one of the issues I see as where we now should begin to focus in terms of the next decade or so, and get the institutions restored.
Well, education is certainly key, and also, if I may add, integrated education too.
Yes.
There's been some movement, but not enough in that direction.
Correct.
Which could be important. Now, you took over the office of Taoiseach. You were Taoiseach in 2020, and during actually a bit of a tense period, as some would say, in terms of the negotiation over the Northern Ireland Protocol, and then also the subsequent political instability in Stormont. How have these circumstances affected the peace process? Do you think that there's a move forward, or is it still, unfortunately, underpinning it?
I think standing back, the decision to press ahead with Brexit, which was a legitimate decision of the British people in terms of, from a democratic point of view, never really factored in its impact on the Good Friday Agreement and on the sets of relationships that are underpinned by that agreement. We've experienced those negative impacts over the last 2.5 years, because it's clear those who were promoting Brexit didn't really look in any great detail at what the implications would mean for Northern Ireland or for the peace settlement. So we've had to be patient over the last 2.5 years in dealing with this, and there's been, as you know, the protocol was agreed. That has created its challenges. I prefer to look to the future now and say we welcome the fact that there's really meaningful and substantive discussions going on between the United Kingdom government under Rishi Sunak, James Cleverly, and the European Union led by Vice President Šefčovič, and of course President von der Leyen is keeping a very watchful brief on this as well. And so therefore there's less megaphone diplomacy going on. There are no leaks from these talks, which is good. So I'm not going to comment on the sort of specifics of it, other than to say we do take heart from the trust that is built up between the two negotiating teams, for the honesty that's clearly there in how they are engaging, going through all the files, and also I do detect a political will both within the European Union and the United Kingdom to resolve this by negotiation, and the European Union will be flexible in this regard. We understand unionist concerns in respect of all of this, and I've had good relationships with the unionist parties. We'll continue that. And there are issues which we believe can be resolved that they have raised with us, and we want to respond to the concerns that unionism has raised in respect of the protocol, and hopefully things can progress.
What do you think are the prospects for reaching agreement on the protocol? And actually, do you think that a deal could be, in fact, reached before the Good Friday Agreement's 25th anniversary this April?
I think we've all reached an agreement that we wouldn't comment one way or the other on the prospects. I don't understate the difficulties and the challenges involved here in terms of the very difficult decisions that UK government will have to make, and Europe. But we are 2.5 years on from the original challenges, if you like. The geopolitical situation has changed dramatically. So there is a mood within Europe that on the big geopolitical questions, be it Ukraine, migration, energy, food, hunger, that we need to be aligned with the United Kingdom, Europe and the United States and other like-minded democracies on these big issues. Therefore, that's the compelling reason, I think, for resolution of this issue. Plus, yes, you're correct, 25th anniversary coming along. I speak to unionist leaders, nationalist leaders, all political parties. They don't want the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement to arrive with no institutions in place. That would not be a good look on the current situation. And so I would hope that the prospect of the 25th anniversary would motivate people to sort of resolve these issues.
Right. I have a question about the U.S. and U.S. involvement. And you very graciously, in your remarks, mentioned the role of the United States. And I'd like to ask you, how do you see the U.S. role in the peace process? But I also want to cite Ted Smith. He asked the question, what more can we do in America to encourage reconciliation and cooperation between the communities in Northern Ireland? And he is president of the Glucksman Ireland House in New York University.
Yeah, I've met Ted
Yes.
as well. I think, first of all, President Biden has been very strong and impactful in terms of his comments on the absolute necessity to protect the Good Friday Agreement. That clarity from the President and from the team in the White House, I think, has had impact. And their continuing dialogue with all concerned, both the United Kingdom government, the Irish government, I think has been positive. And I think that needs to be maintained, and I think it will be. And I think there's a genuine desire on behalf of President Biden, and I will meet the Friends of Ireland later today. There's a bipartisan support for this, as I said, and that is important to maintain that. I believe the appointment of Joe Kennedy as economic envoy is very positive, because that economic dimension is very important. That parallel with the 25th anniversary, and hopefully if things could work out, there's a new opportunity to reset the economic future for Northern Ireland, utilising United States, creating investment opportunities for Northern Ireland, along with the European Union, and Vice President Šefčovič is up for this, and President von der Leyen is, the United Kingdom government and the Irish government. It could be a really positive moment in April if all of that could align. So that United States intervention has been fair, it's been bipartisan, and that sort of approach needs to continue.
Can you share a little bit more, because you're here, your visit, you're meeting with members of Congress, also high-level administration officials. You had a meeting with, I believe, National Security Advisor Sullivan. Is there something that you can share about, to some extent, about the dialogue and where you see it reinforcing itself and the cooperation that we have?
I think it's very important. I mean, first of all, as I said earlier, I don't want to preempt what's going on at the moment in terms of the talks, and I've been very studiously avoiding commentary on the EU-UK talks.
Probably very wise.
Yeah, and it's sort of frustration of many. I'm a believer that when you're in a negotiation, megaphone commentary and so on may be disadvantageous. That said, it's important we all touch base, and that's why I'm here these 2 days, meeting with key officials in the administration, with the Friends from Ireland, to really give our perspective on how we see things. I would have met with the northern parties last week. I've been in constant contact with my UK counterpart, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and James Cleverly as well. And I would have met with the Prime Minister in Blackpool before Christmas. So that sort of engagement, and so we work out the potential pathway to getting these issues resolved, and that is important. And I think we leave it at that for the moment. Okay.
No, absolutely. I think the timing of your visit is key. You couldn't help
well, I appreciate, Paula,
prevent me from asking that question.
Some journalists will ask me afterwards, and they might be more tenacious, but I respect, given your experience.
Indeed.
Your understanding of the situation.
Of course. Actually, let me also mention we have Mark Zashin, who also has a question relevant to the Good Friday Agreement. Do you have evidence of how the Good Friday Agreement increased the economy of Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, our sense is, and it's interesting even in the context of the current issues, manufacturing in Northern Ireland is enjoying a particularly good period, particularly even since the protocol, because they feel they have access both to the European Union single market and to the GP market. But essentially, the absence of violence, Paul, you know this, creates a more certainty for investment. So Northern Ireland is doing well on the manufacturing side. The food chain there is very strong, and the links between the south and the north in terms of agriculture, agri-food is very important. When I was in London last St. Patrick's weekend, that was before I came to the US, but anyway, the mood in the financial services sector was quite positive about Northern Ireland, and quite a number of people saying to me from the financial sector world, services world, that they wanted to invest in Northern Ireland. So it has overall been positive on those fronts. The level of north-south trade has increased exponentially since the Good Friday Agreement. Right? So the role of Intertrade Ireland, which is a north-south body under the umbrella of the Good Friday Agreement, has done its work. And so basically very simple things. creating opportunities for SMEs in the Republic vis-a-vis Northern Ireland and vice versa, joint research programs. Under the Shared Island Agreement now, we've invested heavily in collaborations on research between third level institutions in Northern Ireland and third level institutions in the Republic on issues of mutual concern, on cancer, for example. And I heard President Biden's really heartfelt statement last evening in the State of the Union on cancer. Well, North and South now we've universities working on really detailed research work on diagnostics through blood and so on in relation to cancer. Fascinating stuff. And we're funding that. So the future is bright in my view. That's why we need the political stability. That's why we need the institutions back to get on with the real work that really puts bread and butter on the table.
Well, and you're also right about the importance of education, because in terms of investment, there certainly is already an educated workforce, but it also needs to be upped and enhanced. If I may, I wanted to ask you with your defense hat, if I may pose the question, because we also have a defense question that came in, but let me pose this. You know, in 2020, you in particular, you made a determined effort to revitalize the Irish Defence Forces. What was the reasoning behind that? And if I may add in, Mark Zashin also had this question. He said, do you have evidence of how did Ireland respond in thinking when Germany increased their defense budget? So let me sort of combine both.
Yeah.
He mentions Germany, but mine is, you know, unto yourself in 2020. What was the motivation?
Well, to be frank, there has been historic underinvestment in the Irish Defence Forces, be straight up. And we need to increase the level of investment and percentage of investment as part of our overall economy. We've traditionally, our niche has been, our defining feature in foreign policy has been peacekeeping with the United Nations, and we've had a distinguished record all over the world in going into troubled spots under UN mandates or European mandates in some respects for peacekeeping or peace enforcement. In Lebanon and UNIFIL for many, many years. And you know, we've lost personnel and so on who've given their life in the cause of peace. So there is a need to generally increase expenditure, but also to modernize our defense forces, taking on board new threats. During COVID-19, we had a horrific a cyber attack on our health service. It actually ground it to a halt, caused immense stress and strain on all those working on the front line. Couldn't even get scans and so on. It was really penetrated. Now we got that resolved over time, but it's a warning and a lesson, and that cybersecurity is one of the new modern threats, of course. We have to stop thinking about war in the conventional sense all of the time. We've got to look at the hybrid threats that are emerging, cyber threats and so on, and how we deal with those. So basically our capacity needs to improve. We're part of EU security and defence programme and strategies, which involves interoperability with other member states. So for example, we're in Lebanon at the moment with the Polish army, so in peacekeeping mission, one has to have interoperability in terms of weaponry and so on like that. So our policies have progressed and evolved over the years, but there is no question that we need to significantly increase our investment. We need to modernize the army and our capacity to protect vital assets.
All right, well, thank you for that. And I should have identified, I combined two questions, one from Mark Zashin, but also the question about really why there's this determined effort to revitalize came from Professor Dale Herspring from out in Seattle, Washington. He had another part to it, if I may ask, which is an interesting one. He indicated that Ireland has become increasingly important from a naval standpoint, given all the cables that run along the ocean floor opposite Ireland. And he posed the question, is Ireland looking at or becoming serious about building a navy with an anti-submarine warfare and an ASW capacity?
Well, I think that would be some distance away. I mean, I think we have to, like many militaries across the world, we're also suffering recruitment and retention issues, to be honest with you. But again, we're part of a broader European security and defence strategy in terms of protection and so on. Now, we're not military aligned. There is no common defence in Europe and so on. But again, all of these mutually important issues such as undersea cables and so on. I mean, Ireland will never be in a position really to engage in submarine warfare and like that. But I think you can develop strategies to protect vital economic assets, and particularly in terms of the undersea cables and so forth. And not all are as one might think in terms of conventional war type approaches.
Let me ask one more in the defense domain, if I may, that came in from Robert Finley. Will Ireland consider joining NATO in view of Russia's ongoing hostility towards Europe and its attack on Ukraine?
Our view on that is we're going to have a conversation more generally, and I think the question for us shouldn't be a binary one as to whether we join NATO or not. I mean, we're involved in many partnerships at the moment. I've mentioned European Security and Common Defence, which has been evolving for over 25 years. And so, for example, we are in joint battle groups with EU member states for training purposes and so on. And then we have a partnership for peace with NATO. We're also obviously involved in United Nations peacekeeping. So there has been an evolution in terms of working with others and working with various organisations and so on. But Ireland has had, in terms of its foreign policy and, some key principles. I've mentioned some of them in my earlier remarks, but also the whole idea of nuclear non-proliferation, for example, the advancement of human rights. So we see our strengths in certain areas where we believe we can make a more meaningful contribution. So like we're working on international accountability for Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. And we've been one of the leaders within Europe in terms of advancing that idea of the crime of aggression, for example, having an interim tribunal set up. So we think we can add something there. We've been one of the first countries within the EU to push very strongly on the Western side for Ukraine's membership or application to join the European Union. I would have been personally very strong on the need to do that because I think enlargement is an important tool for the European Union to stop the meddling that goes on in the neighbourhood. And frankly, enlargement has taken too long, in my view, in the neighbourhood, in terms of the European Union, be it the Western Balkans or elsewhere.
Others have certainly stated that. Ireland has been very generous. You mentioned Ukraine. Ireland has been very generous and has accepted, I believe, more than 70,000 Ukrainian refugees in the past year when Russia launched its unprovoked war on Ukraine. Can you comment on that? I mean, You've done that and just the kinds of challenges that you've had to deal with here?
We've about 75,000 Ukrainians have come into Ireland, which is probably well over 1% of our population. And I think the Irish people have been remarkable in the degree to which they've welcomed Ukrainians, the vast majority being mothers and children who are fleeing the war. I think it's the most basic human response that anybody could make. Because we can all see on our screens this war and the terrible impact on civilian infrastructure, homes being bombed. I went to Kyiv myself, I went to Irpin and Bucha. I saw the evidence of the atrocities that have been committed with people with their hands tied behind their back and murdered in cold blood. So that's the context here. Now, it is challenging, and when you parallel that with a fivefold increase in people seeking asylum under the International Protection Conventions, collectively, all of that has created challenges for our capacity to accommodate, absorb. And there are challenges on the international asylum front. In terms of Ukraine, our schools have responded magnificently. Our teachers have. I've been in schools recently where they've embraced Ukrainian children and worked with them. We would have had experience in the past in terms of international asylum as well and doing our best. So I have to give a shout out, if you like, to our education world and to people generally in Ireland who have been generous and responsive given what has happened. But I do also acknowledge the challenges and the pressures that it creates. But we must always be mindful. Putin sees migration as a weapon. He is bombing civilian targets to force people to flee their homes. He wants division in Europe. He wants division within societies within Europe and member states. The big challenge for the European Union over the next 12 months is to hold the nerve and not to allow Putin's tactics divide us. And that is so important. And that is why it's very important that Europe and the United States stay very much aligned, along with Canada, Japan, and United Kingdom, and many others. Because in many ways, this is about our values, the the idea that states can just invade another state because you don't like democracy or they're our neighbour and we should control what they do and suppress their freedom, that's gone. And that cannot sustain.
Well, Ireland's approach here is just really very, very generous. And your statement here, I couldn't agree more with what you said in terms of the importance of the unity of purpose, that it's crucial in the time ahead. We have another question from Craig Kelly, going back to the Good Friday Agreement. The question is, have you been approached by other countries seeking lessons from the Good Friday Agreement and the Shared Island Initiative, and that could be applied to their own challenges?
Yes, we have. And Bertie Ahern would have done a lot of work in different parts of the world. Former Taoiseach and Prime Minister of Ireland, who was one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. And he continues to help other locations. Eamon Gilmore, former Tánaiste, another government, has done great work in Colombia in the peace process there. Now, we don't do it in a sort of arrogant manner because every conflict can be different, but there are principles, parity of esteem, respect, tolerance, patience. We've learned many lessons in the journey towards peace, the most important one being you've got to understand where the other person is coming from. You've got to understand the pressures that the other person is going through. I always remember reading, was Bobby Kennedy's book on the 10 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at the end, what are the lessons? Well, the first thing you've got to understand is where the other person is in terms of what they need to get themselves out of a jam. And like, I mean, I learned that myself. I became involved in politics because of Northern Ireland as a young member of Parliament. I had my own ideas before I joined politics and got involved. But then when I began to meet people of different ideas and backgrounds, I went to various fora where we would meet, Chatham House rules, and you learn more about each other. That's the most important thing in any peace process, is that you learn something about the person. If I use the phrase on the other side, of course, ultimately you begin to realize we're not on two different sides, and nor should we be, but it's painstaking and it takes a lot of work. So yes, we do.
Let me ask you two more questions. I'm noticing our time. We have just a few more minutes. So let me ask you, this one is from Jonah Marsh. How do you have quite a few questions that have come in, and I've really decided to go to them because there's real activism here. How do you assess the prospects for integration between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the context of the EU? To make reference to an example of close ties between EU and non-EU states in Romania and Moldova, stemming from sort of intertwined histories. The question is, could such an arrangement even be possible here?
Well, over time, that's an interesting question. And in fact, I know people in the context of the current discussions we are having, this issue of divergence, you know, between future EU directives and its impact on Northern Ireland. There has to be channels or mechanisms whereby inputs from Northern Ireland can happen vis-a-vis the European Union. But we will look around at how other relationships have developed over time. And we need to get the immediate stuff done, if that's possible. You know, the immediate talks and so on are underway at the moment. But I think in the fullness of time, the European Union isn't going anywhere. So there needs to be relationships developed and worked on, and mechanisms designed to facilitate access and discussions and dialogue. And I get the sense that we are moving into a different space. I get the sense that Europe is in a different space than it was 2.5 years ago when Brexit kind of came into effect. You know, under Rishi Sunak, I see a seriousness and a professionalism about where the UK wants to be. President von der Leyen, I think President Macron, Scholz, Chancellor Scholz, they all want a mature relationship now into the future. So all of that creates possibilities over time in terms of good channels of communication and a good way of resolving issues that might arise, and that's going to be key.
This is a last one, and again with your defense hat, interesting question. Investment, and it's from Emmanuel Jacob, investment in the Irish Defence Forces is needed as mentioned, but does the Minister agree that the essential investment should be in the human resources of the Defence Forces? Recruitment and retention is a serious problem that can affect the operationability. In this case.
100%.
Yes.
I do agree. Culture is also important. I think we need to look at the culture within our defence forces and within military in general. look where young people are today. Are the approaches of the past of a sufficiency, are they enough to attract young people now into a career in the military? So culture, I think, is going to be very important. And I actually would think that the culture, the sort of climate for employing people within military situation is one that we need to have a very keen look at, and we will in Ireland, to make it an attractive place and a safe place to work in. And that culture piece, as well as improving terms and conditions, which we've done in the last 2 years in terms of pay, has increased significantly from where it was. But the culture piece is also very important.
Well, Tánaiste, we are at the end of our interview. We not only thank you for your time, but literally the tour de horizon that you have gone through this morning and all these issues. We're very honored indeed to have you here at the Atlantic Council. Just thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Tánaiste.
Well, thank you very much, Paula, as well, and thank you for all your work on behalf of Ireland down through the years, or for Ireland, and thank you for your attention. Details.
Thank you.
Take care.